Welcome to the Dinosaur George podcast, a show about paleontology and other earth sciences. Dinosaur George is a public speaker, author, and TV host with 30 years of study in paleontology. He has performed live in over 4,500 events across the US and Canada. Now, here is Dinosaur George.
Well, hey there, everybody. How are you doing? I hope everyone is doing well. I'm Dinosaur George. You are listening to the Dinosaur George podcast, a podcast that is dedicated to paleontology and earth sciences in general. I've got some good news. I've been able to contact a couple of paleontologists who are able to fit in their schedule an interview. So that will be coming up soon. Now, most of them are only available in August, so these will be coming a little bit later on. But again, I've got some cool interviews lined up with some really interesting topics, so stay posted for that. Today, I'm going to answer a question. I'm going to dedicate the first part of the show to a question that's been asked over and over and over again, and that is, how do paleontologists know what sort of dinosaur they're looking at when they only find a few bones? How do they know what they're looking at? Well, that's the topic of today. When I finish discussing that, then I will answer some questions that have been submitted by those of you who listen to the podcast or those of you that go to my YouTube channel and listen to the podcast there. All right. So how do they know? Well, first of all, let me say this. It is usually no accident that a paleontologist is in a specific place looking for bones. They don't just wander the country randomly hoping to come across dinosaur bones. That's not how it works. You see, layers of dirt are like pages of a book. Imagine you take a book and you lay it on its side and you look at the side of the book and you see all the pages sitting one on top of the other. Well, that's kind of sort of like layers of dirt in the ground. It works the same way. Each one of those pages represents a layer, and each one of those layers represents a different time. In almost all cases, the farther down into the dirt you go, the farther back in time you're going. That's usually the way it works. So in order to find dinosaur bones, you have to figure out which layer of dirt they're in or which page of the book they're on. So imagine your book is laying on its side and you open up the book to page 100. And let's imagine that page 100 represents the Jurassic period. Okay, if I want to find Allosaurus, I have to go find page 100 somewhere in the country, somewhere in the world. I hope page 100 is where it's accessible to me. I can go see it. So how can page 100 be accessible to me if it's buried under all the other pages? Well, there's a couple of ways. One is erosion. Erosion is where dirt can be moved in and cover something, or dirt can be moved away and uncover something. Like, for instance, when the wind is blowing and it's blowing dirt, well, wherever the wind is blowing, the dirt is being picked up and that's uncovering the layers below it. But wherever the dirt lands, that's adding pages to our book and it's covering the things that were there. So first off, you want to go to a place where erosion has done most of your work. You don't want to, if you went to your backyard and you started digging a hole and you started going back in your book, you might ultimately reach the Jurassic page. You might get to page 100. You might get there. But that doesn't mean you're going to find a bone there. Bones are not covering your entire page. They're randomly placed around your page, around your layer. So you want to go to a place where nature has done most of the work and has exposed that layer or page so that you can look across a wide area and have a better chance of spotting the bone. So you go to a place where erosion has uncovered the page, or you go to a place where, let's say, the hill has been exposed and you could look at the individual layers in the hill. And once you know which layer represents the Jurassic, then you look at that layer and you try to find something sticking out. And if you see it, then you start digging in, and then you go in and you start taking all the pages off the top so you can go in and excavate the bone. So first of all, they're going to be looking in a place where they already have an idea of what age they're looking for. If I want to find Tyrannosaurus Rex bones, I don't want to look on page 100 because that's the late Jurassic. Tyrannosaurus Rex lived in the late Cretaceous. So I've got to look further up that book or into those layers and find a Cretaceous formation. And again, how do I find that? Well, I go to a place where Erosion has done a lot of the work for me and gives me the chance to see that page. So let's say that on page 90 is our Cretaceous formation. See, page 100 is further down in our book, so that's going back in time. So I've got to go up in time to find the page that holds the Cretaceous period. And so I already know where I'm going to be looking and what I can expect to find. If I wanted to find woolly mammoth bones in Texas, I'm not going to go to a place where page 90 is exposed because that's too early. Mammoths didn't live then. I want to go way further up in our book. Let's say we want to go to page 20 in our book, or maybe page 10 in our book. And where's that? Well, that's kind of in the Houston area of Texas, kind of there. I can go find mammoth bones there. So the first thing they do is they know where they are looking so that they have an idea of what they can find. Next, let's say they find it. Okay, so they find just a single bone, one single bone. Well, they have to figure out what that bone is, and they do that by recognizing the shape of the bone. When you look at a skeleton of a dinosaur, if you look at two carnivores, let's say you look at Allosaurus and let's say you look at Tyrannosaurus Rex. Well, when you glance at them, they both look very similar. They look like they're the same thing, right? And then you look a little closer and you go, well, now wait a minute. This guy's got long arms with 3 claws, and this one's got two short arms with 2 claws and a little half digit. So you go, okay, well, that's different. I can see that. And then you look at the skull and you go, okay, these guys look way different because this one's head is huge. But this other guy, this Allosaurus, has kind of bumps, horns over his eyes. So that makes him look different. So you begin to recognize there's differences. Well, if you look even closer at each individual bone, they are very different. They look very, very different once you study them. So a paleontologist is somebody who studies these bones and they can recognize what the bone is just by looking at it. It's like, for instance, Pokemon for you younger listeners. If you guys like Pokemon and you and I were together and they showed us a big picture of all the different Pokemons, you could probably start telling me who they are simply because you recognize them. Okay, I don't study Pokemon. I don't know what a Pokemon is. I don't know what they are. I don't know who the individual characters are, but you do because that's what you study. So now they bring up a picture of individual kinds of bones. And now you might not study bones, so you may look at them and go, I don't know what any of those are, but I might be able to tell you that's a femur, that's a tibia, that's a fibula, that's the radius, that's the ulna, that's a coracoid. I might be able to tell you what they are because I recognize the shapes because that's what I study. So paleontologists can dig up one bone and they can say, all right, this is the femur. This is the femur. Your femur is your upper leg bone, biggest bone in your body. So they can immediately identify what it is. And now, what if that bone, though, is broken and they only have half of the bone? Can they still do that? In most cases, yes. In most cases, they can go, I still know what it is. I don't have to see both ends to know what it is. And then the really good paleontologists, they can even tell you if it's just the center section of the bone, just a tube-looking thing, and you go, I have no idea what it is. They still might be able to tell you, because of the shape, what the bone is. So they've identified where to look. They've identified what the bone or bones are. If you're lucky, you find more bones. That makes it much easier. But let me say this. Now, dinosaurs that are cousins, like the ceratopsians, like Styracosaurus, Pachyrhinosaurus, Triceratops, their individual bones look very, very similar to each other. In some cases, you cannot tell the difference between whose backbone I'm looking at. I know it's a backbone, but I may not be able to know who it belongs to. So just picking up one bone doesn't mean you go, aha, I know who this is. It could, but it doesn't always mean that. So you're finding, let's say you find lots of bones. Well, that helps a lot because then it gives you more clues. Think of a paleontologist as an investigator that's studying a crime scene. The more clues that are there, the more likely you're going to be able to figure out who done it. So next, they find the bone and they figured out what the bone is and they know what page of the history book they're on. So they already are starting to formulate these clues. Next, they need to find out, well, what other animals have been found on this page or in this layer of dirt? So there are databases available to paleontologists where they can do this research and they can find out. And they said, okay, let's see, in this particular page, because we're on page 100, I found a bone. I know because of the shape of the bone, it's a femur. I also know because of the shape of the bone, it is a carnivore because their bones are different. I can recognize the difference. So what carnivores have been found on my page? So you go through and you find out, all right, they found Allosaurus, they found Ceratosaurus, they found a bone that so far has not been identified, so the dinosaur doesn't have a name yet. They found that weird looking bone. They found a bone from something some people call Saurophaganax, which is a big carnivore. They found a bone some people say is a different species. So you begin to find out what has been found there. And once you find out who's been found there, then you compare your bone to their bones. Did they find the femur of the Ceratosaurus? And if so, can I see it? And so can I compare it to the one I have? Museums are constantly allowing paleontologists to go into their collections room and look at bones. That happens all the time. Paleontologists from all over the world get to come in and look through exhibits to find out what they have so they can compare it. So here's our deal. We found a bone on page 100. What's that page from? That's from the late Jurassic. I know it's a femur. It's an upper leg bone. I know that. I know it's a carnivore. I know that. I now have compared my bone to all the other kinds of animals that have been found there. And from all of that, I recognize I have found the upper leg bone of an Allosaurus. So, mystery solved. I know who it is. End of story. But if there are no bones like the one I found, and when I say compare, remember you guys, the bone of a baby Allosaurus, the femur of the baby Allosaurus, will look just like the femur of an adult. It's just smaller. So I don't have to match exactly. I don't have to find the same exact size to be able to compare it. I just have to find the same shape that has all the same details on my bone. So let's say that you go through all that and you do not find anything that matches yours. Yours is totally different from every other one that's been found on page 100. Now comes the opportunity to research it, write up a scientific paper on it, and then give it a name. Now, it's not that simple. You don't get to do that simply. There are rules that paleontologists have to follow. Science, the most important part of paleontology is ensuring that there are standards, that there are rules that have to be in place. Because if not, then science means nothing if there's no rules. I can't find a bone and say, I am going to name this dinosaur Georgus Amazinganus, which means the amazing George. Ooh, I like that name. That's a good name. Okay, we're going to use that. All right, you don't get to do that. And that's the reason why, because they don't want Georgus Amazinganus to be a dinosaur, and I don't blame them. I don't really want that either. So you get to name it. So to do that, you have to write this very detailed paper that explains why you say this is a new animal. You have to give your proof. You have to show, well, where did you go to research it? How many animals did you check? What are the resources that you proved that this is a new dinosaur? And tell me, why is this femur different than Allosaurus or Ceratosaurus? Once you go through that and you propose this and then it's approved, then you can name a new dinosaur. So when paleontologists go out in the field and they're looking for fossils, they're not blindly walking around looking. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they get lucky and do that sort of stuff. But they usually know where they are going They usually know what page they're going to be looking for. They have an understanding of what has been found there before. They have an understanding of anatomy. Anatomy is sort of like the science of how we're put together. They know what the bones look like. They know anatomy. They know where they're looking. They know who's been found there before. Now all they have to do is identify who it is. And in our particular scenario, it turns out to be Allosaurus. And what a surprise. That turns out to be my favorite dinosaur. Aren't you amazed that I chose him? All right, when I come back, I'm going to answer some questions that were submitted by you. And if you have a question, you can go to my website, dinosaurgeorge.com, click on the Ask Dinosaur George page and submit your question. Or you can contact me through Skype, which is dinosaur.george, and you can leave a message. Or if you ever see that I'm online, if you ever see the little green dot that I'm online on Skype, immediately call me. And if I'm not speaking to somebody else, I will record your question and you and I can speak together live about your question or whatever you want to talk about. All right, when I come back, like I said, I'll jump in and we'll get to some of these questions.
Bring Dinosaur George's traveling exhibit to your school, museum, or city. This is the largest exhibit of its kind in North America and will turn any facility into a natural history museum. You'll see things like prehistoric mammals, giant fish, ancient reptiles, and of course, dinosaurs. It's affordable, amazing, and will be an event you'll never forget. See complete details at dinosaurgeorge.com or call us toll-free, 888-487-7478. Bring Dinosaur George's traveling museum to your community today.
All right, you guys remember I did a podcast recently about the sounds dinosaur makes. And one of the things I talked about was so many paleontologist friends that I have talk about how much they dislike the idea that dinosaurs were always screaming and roaring and stomping their feet and making all these noises. So I gave a previous podcast, I gave my opinion of that. Well, I was fortunate enough that my friend Michael Ciccone, who happens to have a background or is studying prehistoric life sounds, Michael contacted me and said, hey, I'd like to give a little insight into it because he's more familiar with it. So Michael was nice enough to give us some time. So Michael, welcome to our show.
Hi there, George. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. So Michael, tell us a little bit about yourself first, just your personal life, about you.
So, as you said, my name is Michael Ciccone. I am a second-year geology undergrad student at UT Austin. And I started helping out in Dr. Julia Clark's paleontology and evolutionary biology lab halfway through my first semester this past year. And I'm currently doing a research project on campus over the summer. My research interests broadly include vertebrate paleontology and conservation paleontology. Up until now, I've worked with the morphology of quill marks in birds and dinosaurs on the ulna that show where the flight feathers in modern birds were once present and continue to be present on modern birds. I've worked with bone histology in paleognathe birds and looking at metabolism, things like that. And I have also helped with the CT segmentation of hummingbird syrinxes, which that is one of the specialties that this lab has helped a lot with in the previous years. Dr. Clark has a large background in bird sound making, as well as many of the grad students in the lab are all great with sound making stuff. So CT segmentation is essentially where I go in and look at a CT 3D scan of a bird's throat and lower sort of abdominal region down all the way to the lungs, and identify the sound-making region called the syrinx. And I kind of segment out just the syrinx so we can take a good look at just the sound-making region. And I was taught to do that halfway through this past year. And so that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm hoping to continue doing research, and I'd like to do some field work and such as time goes on. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
My gosh, man. Well, then you are the perfect person to talk about. Man, I wish I would have known what your background was earlier, or a better idea of your background. We're friends through Facebook. I wish I would have known that, because you would have been the perfect person. Plus, bringing on Dr. Clark would have been neat as well. And maybe I can schedule a way to do that later on, because I'd love to interview her as well. You're the perfect person to talk about about the podcast episode that I had before about dinosaur sounds. Now, before I get into that, There's one other thing I want to ask you. You're doing some outreach now, right? Like you're speaking to school children and stuff like that. Do you do that as well?
I do when I get the chance. When I was in Dr. Clark's lab over this past spring, I had a teacher contact Dr. Clark, who's currently out of the country. She's in Germany right now, doing research. And the teacher had asked her, hey, we have a book fair that we were having for these elementary kids, and it was themed after paleontology. So she reached out to us, Dr. Clark did, and said, hey, do any of you guys want to go do this? And I didn't have anything going that Friday evening. So I said, sure, I can go do that. And me and a friend who does herpetology, his name is Daniel Carter, went out and set up a table with some local fossils as well as some casts from the Texas Memorial Museum. Big thank you to them for that. And we were able to kind of show all this off to the kids and introduce some local paleontology as well as some local herpetology and general zoology, plus some broad concepts of how we do science in paleontology.
Oh, that's exciting. Good for you for sharing your love of paleontology with young kids, because that's going to spur the next generation of Michaels who will come up behind you. And so good for you for doing that.
Thank you. It was a blast. It was interesting having been on the other end for so long, getting to step into the shoes of someone like you, actually, who kind of brought me up through the ranks.
Right.
Being on the other end of it is very fulfilling.
That's very cool, man. So I proposed that dinosaurs would have been capable of being vocal, but not to the extent that we see on TV, the roaring sounding like a lion. But I don't have the research and background that you do. So what can you add to the conversation about this notion about were these we both understand the Hollywood version is not accurate, but give us some insight into what you know about what you think those animals would have sounded like.
Sure. So I personally haven't worked a lot on dinosaurs quite yet. I'm still getting into that. But having been around the lab for about a year or so almost now, I've had a lot of exposure to all the complex questions and answers that this question has, and it all comes down, really, at least how Dr. Clark has described it before. It really comes down to one major question, and that's the question of open versus closed mouth vocalization. Now, the idea of that is just that were these animals making noises open mouth or closed mouth? Are they, doing what we see in the movies where they are opening their mouths and making a noise, like a bird tweeting or, another animal roaring or what have you? Or is it going to be a closed mouth vocalization like you see in some modern reptiles and archosaurs, like alligators and crocodiles will do this? They have this big rumbling bellow that they make, but they do it with their mouths closed. And some modern birds also do that. You get the ratites, the ostriches, the emus, the cassowaries. There are great videos on YouTube, you should look it up, of these big birds making these extremely low frequency noises, but they do it all without opening their mouths. So, as I mentioned before, the sound making mechanism, so to speak, in birds, it's a vocal organ in birds, is different than any other living animal. It's called the syrinx. Now, most people know about the larynx because that's what we have, and most other animals have this, including, most mammals have this.
Right.
That's that's your voice box, so to speak. That's what we use to make noise. It's located at the top of the throat. The syrinx is different. It's located down in the chest, right where the trachea splits into the two sections of the lungs. That's where the syrinx is located. And it allows birds to make so many complex noises and sometimes even two sounds at once. It's kind of insane. And so we know that other archosaurs, like crocodilians, have larynxes. Birds, the other closest relative to dinosaurs, have syrinxes. So at what point did we see a shift towards syrinxes away from larynxes? And that question actually hasn't been answered yet. There was a really famous study by Dr. Clark that you may have heard about in 2016 describing the oldest known syrinx in a bird from Antarctica called Vagatus. We still talk about it all the time in the lab. There's a whole other project going on with it. But it's this late Cretaceous sort of shorebird diver type thing going on in Antarctica. And it was preserved so well that you actually still had the tracheal rings that go down the syrinx all the way into the lungs still there. Now, 99.9% of the time, you don't get that. That's not preserved,
right? Because
they're cartilaginous. But in this one, it was. And this is a late Cretaceous bird, so that's telling us that birds had syrinxes by the time the late Cretaceous rolled around. And not only that, it's possible to have it preserved. We just haven't found that yet in dinosaurs. That can mean one of two things. Either we just haven't found it yet, or they didn't have it. It could be that the syrinx is something that evolved after dinosaurs and birds kind of split.
Right.
But we don't know. So, that kind of leads into some other interesting questions. If they did have syrinxes, then there's a huge range of noises that they could make that are all very bird, so to speak, what you would think of birds.
Right.
But since we haven't found that yet, we're left to assume so far that they didn't have a syrinx until we find one and be able to say, yes, this is what they had, and it makes sense because we have the evidence for it. So, but that doesn't mean that they were silent, though. There are a huge range of noises that an animal can make without that syrinx organ. For instance, as I mentioned, that variety of hisses and closed mouth calls, the bellows, the rumble, the low frequency noises. I mean, alligators make some pretty crazy noises, and so do a lot of these rat-type birds that have syrinxes, but also make some other really interesting noises. So that's kind of where the study is at right now, is this question of, did dinosaurs have syrinxes? Or did they have some other sound mechanism? So without a larynx, they wouldn't have been running around making these lion noises. Even alligators and crocodiles don't have the type of larynx that many mammals do, that we, kind of attribute to these very mammalian predatory roars. So although they didn't have that, there were a bunch of really interesting sounds that they could make.
That's amazing. See, that's absolutely amazing that, well, first of all, the fact that we can find a Cretaceous bird that has the features, the avian dinosaurs clearly then the birds are coming from the line of avian dinosaurs. So one day, if we're lucky enough to find it, we may find that raptors may have been able to make the chirping noises and maybe even the singing noises of birds, if in fact they had the right internal capacity. But what you're saying now, though, is that based on the evidence, they're even if they are vocal, they're still vocal in a reptilian way and probably not mammalian way, because it wouldn't make any sense for the archosaurs to have the sound making mechanism that the modern crocodiles do, but then dinosaurs evolved something totally uniquely different, and then birds come off of that with something else. It's probably more likely that that dinosaurs are making the sounds. I mean, they certainly can make a hiss by opening their mouth, but I guess that opening the mouth is not to make the noise. I guess it's more so to demonstrate the teeth or the threat, like the way snakes can open their mouths and hiss. But I guess they could make the same sound with their mouth closed, I suppose. So what you're saying is that based on the evidence now, it is less likely that they could make any of the sounds that Hollywood applies to them, and is maybe more likely right now that they're making the crocodilian grumbles, the growls, that frequency. But if evidence shows up, maybe they were more bird-like in their sounds as well.
And I will say that rat-type birds, the ostriches, emus, cassowaries, etc., actually do make some of these really low-frequency calls. There's actually a nice video on YouTube of a cassowary that you can't listen to through your phone speaker because it's so low that you have to wear headphones in order to even hear it. In real life, you would almost feel it more than you would hear it. And To me, even though, the first idea that might come to a lot of people's minds is oh, they didn't roar. That makes them less scary and less interesting. If you want to hear scary, imagine something as large as these, large predatory dinosaurs rolling up on you and making a rumble that you can feel.
Yeah.
They may not have been shaking the ground with their feet. They might have been shaking the ground with their voices.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Which I would love to see a Hollywood rendition of some large predatory dinosaur just showing up behind someone, not making a sound until it's already too late. And then suddenly the ground just shakes.
God. Man, well, I spent some time with Dr. Laurence Whitmer in Ohio University, and he does a lot with CT scanning. And when we were talking to him about finding the inner ear canals that could, with CAT scanning, they could find so much stuff. And he commented on a number of occasions of their ability to hear at low frequency sound. And so low frequency noise travels farther than high frequency noise. When an elephant makes a low frequency call to another elephant, that sound can travel farther because it makes, if I understand correctly, a broader sound wave that isn't as likely to bounce off of the first thing it sees and come back. That sound wave can continue on farther. So it would make sense for an animal who needs to communicate over a great distance that a roar may sound like a noise that we can hear, but if you put a lion next to an elephant and both of them communicated at their normal frequencies, an elephant's voice could be picked up at a much greater range than a lion's, because a lion's is high pitched relatively and doesn't travel as far. And if the inner ear canals have the ability to pick up low frequency sound, that all lines up to your point about if they're making those low frequency grumbles like the modern cassowary does, then all of that would fall in place, that the vocalization is just as terrifying as we like to apply, but we should be listening at a different frequency in order to gain that terror in our mind. I agree with you. I remember, you ever seen those videos of those crocodilians the crocodiles that are sounding, and you see the water dancing off of their back, and it is the most remarkable thing in the world. Had you been able to submerge or have the cassowary stand in water up to his chest and do that, I bet you'd see the same thing, right? I
wouldn't be surprised.
I mean, how cool would that be? But yeah, could you imagine the feeling on the back of your neck of those vibrating? My God, to your point, I think that'd be more terrifying if you're all sitting around talking and you feel the air move and you wonder, what the crud is that? And you pull open your tent to step outside staring at a Tyrannosaurus Rex. God. Well, man, this is, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to contact me. And this is something I encourage with everybody, that my show, I don't want a show that's just my opinion of these things. We need scientific fact to be able to support or to correct my opinion. And I love the fact that you took the time to contact me, Michael, and that you're willing to come on and share your information with us. And I think it's fascinating. And quite frankly, I think a lot of listeners, me included, will have a different idea of the sounds dinosaur makes, and who knows what the future holds and how that may be tweaked or proved or disproven for all we know. But for right now, I can tell you it really adds a lot to that podcast. And I really regret that podcast, I didn't make that podcast by contacting you first, because it would have made a much more interesting one and much more exciting one.
Well, thank you. It means a lot.
That's pretty impressive, man. So what is the future going to be for you? Where, if you get the perfect job, what would you like to do, or do you know at this point?
Oh gosh, I'm still deciding at this point, but I did just take a trip with a couple of other geology students and two of our professors up to South Dakota and that area of the world. The first time, I'd never been out there, and I saw some really incredible stuff. And one of the things that's popped into my mind is how cool it might be to be something like a national park paleontologist, to be out there in nature, being able to do that sort of outreach for people, both in the sense of showing people the history of these places in, deep time perspective, while also being able to show, look, these are places that we should protect and really just be out there to admire. So I could simultaneously be able to get this across to people, be able to be out there in nature and do field work and such when need be, as well as do any research that might be needed out there, not specifically in that part of the world, but just anywhere that I might be needed. I would love to do that. But other than that, there's a whole host of different things I could do. I could go into academia. I could do teaching. I could do a great number of things and probably be very happy with it.
Right. Well, I can tell you, and this may be a little selfish on my part, but Michael, you're so well spoken, and I watched the video of you interacting with those kids. I think your place in science would be to be the liaison between the science community and the public, because we miss that in some instances. A lot of paleontologists are more comfortable doing what they do. They're in their labs, they're in the field, they're doing that. And so sometimes the general public doesn't get access to the information that they're doing. And so what we need is more paleontologists, more scientists who are the voice of bringing that to them and being able to do it in a way that's understandable by the general public. I've been to a lot of talks where I've listened to paleontologists, and if it wasn't for my understanding of the subject matter they're talking about, most of it would go over my head because they're talking at a level that's more directed at a science community. But the general public needs more people to help understand why are dinosaurs important? Why is it important to save our national parks? Why is it important to do that? Man, I think you would, I hope, again, I'm being selfish, mind you, but I hope you ultimately find your destiny as being that liaison between being the professional scientist and the paleontologist you are going to be, and being the person who communicated to the average person, because I think you do a tremendous service to the science community if we can keep you in that role.
Well, thank you. I'd love to do that. That's one of the things that I've always liked doing, is being able to take this stuff that I learn and, give it to other people through whatever medium I can, whether that be through, I've done videos, whether that's through art or through speaking or whatever it happens to be. And that's one of the things I actually love about working under Dr. Clark, is she is incredible at giving a talk to basically any level of audience. It doesn't matter where your knowledge is at. You could know next to nothing, or you can be one of the best groups in the field. I've seen her give both styles of talk, and they're both incredible. One of the other things that she does in the lab, she has as people and has worked herself on dinosaur color and also modern bird color. Where does that come from? How does pigment work in feathers? And in one talk she gave, she talked about the secret lives of dinosaurs. That's where I learned a lot of this, was her giving these talks about their vocalizations, their pigments in their feathers, and all these things. The public doesn't always get to hear about it,
right,
in a way that makes a lot of sense. And she's able to do it in such a concise and logical way, but in also a way that captures the imagination. So that's what I love about working underneath her, and that's what I hope to be able to do with my own information as time goes on.
Man, that's so refreshing to hear. Well, I'm going to make it a point to add her to our list of hopeful interviews for the podcast, because I know so many people would enjoy hearing from her. Michael, is there a way that if a person is listening to this podcast and they would like to talk to you or get to know you, or maybe get advice from you on school, because we have a lot of young people who are always looking for somebody to help give them some idea. Is there a way that they can contact you? Is that possible? Is it Facebook possible or anything like that?
Absolutely. I am. If you can find me on Facebook, I'm under my name, Michael Ciccone. I'm also on Twitter. You should be able to find it through my name as well. I also have a YouTube channel called Expedition Paleo, on which I've done some of those documentary style videos when I can, trying to get more info out to the public. And you can absolutely reach out to me through there. I am absolutely available to whoever might want to ask any questions, and I can answer what I can at my admittedly limited level so far. But as time goes on, I hope to be able to
Great.
Do more of that.
Well, his name is Michael, Michael, and Ciccone is Chiappone. So Michael.
Yes, sir. That is it.
Michael Ciccone, Chiappone. Try to find him on Facebook or Twitter or follow his YouTube channel as well. Michael, I cannot thank you enough for taking time out to do this. I appreciate it very much and would love to have you back again as a guest as your career continues. We'd like to stay in touch and see where you're going.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, that was really cool information. I appreciate Michael calling in and giving me his insight. Now let's jump in and answer a couple of other questions. This is from Jerrod from Florida. Hey, DG, welcome back, and sorry to hear about your health issues. Hoping for a quick recovery. Hey, man, that's very kind of you, Jerrod. Jerrod, I really appreciate that, and I'm sure everything will be fine. I'm more worried about the downtime, just going stir crazy. All right, it says, my question is, how likely do you think it would be for a dinosaur to have had adaptive camouflage, such as a chameleon or Carnotaurus in the Lost World book? Also, what would we need to be able to see in a fossil to know if the specimen had these characteristics? Thanks. Wow. Man, okay. The ability for those animals to change the outward appearance of the exterior color is a part of those melanosomes, those abilities. But I know there's one specific kind that they can alter. I know squid and octopus can do this as well, where they can make those colors change. I would have said a year ago, we probably will never know that, but I don't think that's accurate now with the new technology and all these advancements that are being made. I mean, who would have thought, 25 years ago that we would know the color of dinosaurs had it not been for the work of all these amazing scientists that are using lasers and technologies and everything else. So is it possible that some of them could have had it? Well, of course, they have their reptilian relatives. They come from a reptilian line, and there's no reason to think that they couldn't. I can't imagine anyone thinking that it just wouldn't be possible. Maybe it wouldn't be to the degree, especially if you're really big. I don't know what kind of energy it takes from the animal to produce that. I mean, no matter what it does, everything you do as an animal takes energy away. And even if it's something as simple as changing a color, that burns some sort of energy. It takes something to happen. That just doesn't happen, without any cost to the animal. Because if it was free, every reptile on the planet would have it. And so I think there's some sort of cost that we may not understand. And so perhaps bigger animals don't have that ability because of whatever the cost is. It's too great to do that over a big area. But I do believe that some of them would have had some sort of ability, maybe, if anything, maybe only in their face. I mean, if you could change the color of your face, that's a tremendous ability to communicate an emotion to other animals. Now, if you're using it as camouflage, though, it's got to be something else. So maybe spots could be more defined. Maybe, the entire body doesn't change, but maybe you have spots that maybe can be enhanced if you're in a shaded area and you're trying to blend in more. I don't know, but that's a very good question, Jerrod, and I don't know what it's going to take to discover if that's possible. But the way we're advancing with science, don't be surprised if we don't. And hey, thank you again for the kind remarks about my health. I'm feeling absolutely fine. All right, Hunter from Nebraska. Hey, DG, how are you? Hunter, I'm doing great. I hope you are well. He says, I have a question about Cryolophosaurus. I know we only have a femur and a fourth of the skull, which includes that strange crest. But what do you think the front of the skull looks like? Is it similar to its cousin Dilophosaurus with the odd nose? Or maybe it was more flattened out like other theropods? Well, Hunter, I've seen the reconstructed skull, and they give it more of a bellisaur look, like the rounded snout of a Carnotaurus. Now, how accurate that is, I don't know. But because I've seen that replica skull in museums, in a number of museums, then I would suspect that they base that off of the most accurate scientific information available. I can't imagine museums would just blindly bring something in that had no scientific significance behind it and display it as a fact. So I'm guessing that it had that rounded snout. It does not appear to have that Dilophosaurus hook, that weird nose with a hooked jaw. It doesn't appear to have anything like that. So, but if indeed it is a cousin of the Dilophosaur, And I don't know if it is or not, Hunter. I'm going on your comment because it sounds like you really know about this animal. I can't remember off the top of my head if it's from that family. But if it is, that of course leads to the question of, well, if he's from that family, then he's probably got traits from that family. I don't know. Does Cryolophosaurus have 4 fingers or does he have 3? Because Dilophosaurus has 4, which is an odd, it's an oddity in the dinosaur kingdom, the theropod kingdom. You don't see a lot of 4-fingered. You have Ceratosaurus and dudes like that. But again, I can only go on the replica skull I saw, where I've seen it in a number of museums. In fact, I'm going to order one for my traveling museum simply because it looks so cool. But I don't know how accurate that is, but I am going on the hope and the assumption that whoever sculpted the remainder of the skull around the original find, that they did it using the best knowledge available, and I simply assume that's the case. All right, Reed from Minnesota. Hey, DG, do you think the dinosaur hybridization between 2 closely related species that lived at the same time and place is possible? Whoa. Like, for example, Gorgosaurus and Displetosaurus. Could they hybridize? Meaning, could they get interbreeding and create something else? Yeah, Reed, I still believe that the weird variety of ceratopsians and hadrosaurs is due to interbreeding. That's just how I feel. Now, I've never gotten any real clear debate from the science community, people that I speak to that say, no, that's not realistic. I've never really heard a solid debate that would lead me to believe that that's not a decent guess, that interbreeding between species causes a hybrid that looks different, that has features of both, but shares something new that neither has, or it's a combination of what they have to form something different. That's what a hybrid is where you are combining 2 different animals to come up with a new one. Now, the animals have to be from the same family. You can't take a giraffe and a mouse and make a long-necked mouse. But how cool would that be, though? But anyway, yes, I do believe that's the case. Now, with Gorgosaurus and Displetosaurus, with your comment, could those 2 breed? I don't know how closely they were. I mean, they're both tyrannosaurs, right? And I don't know. I'll tell you this. Growing up on a farm where we raise cattle, one of the biggest things we had to ensure is that the neighbor's bull did not get into our place, because we didn't want that breed of bull breeding with our cows, because the calves would not be quality. And so we're very careful about interbreeding, ensuring that you're using 2 animals that can create an offspring that is beneficial. And so we do that in cattle a lot. People that raise purebred animals, they're of course concerned about the bloodline being skewed by having something come in and cause it. So like people that breed specific horses or specific dogs, or in the case of my family, cows. Now, we didn't ever do that. We didn't have purebred cows, so we never worried about that. But we were very aware of needing to ensure that the kind of bull you added to the herd was going to breed with this other mix of cows and give you the kind of cow you wanted. So we control that. But in nature, it happens, and I certainly do believe that it would have happened, and I think it may have happened a lot. I don't know. Sometimes you get amazing results and sometimes you get non-amazing results. And those non-amazing results, well, those guys get eaten pretty quick. And so that science experiment comes to a halt because they don't have the ability to evade predators or defend themselves. But then other times you may end up with something that's way superior than the other 2, and it ultimately replaces it. So that's a very good question, Reed. Thank you so much for writing. All right, Rex from Waco, Texas. Rex. Hey, DG, I wanted to thank you so much for answering my last question and for congratulating me on my being a paleontologist for the Paleo Texas Through Time exhibit in Hillsboro, Texas. So I have 2 questions. I am starting a new YouTube series on my Sturdrum Studio channel called Paleo Files. And if you have time, I would love to have you on one of the shows. Hey, I'd be honored to do that, man. Second, and good luck with your YouTube channel. And when you get it up and got some content, let me know, and I'll give a shout out, its specific address, and give you a shout out. Okay, second question I have is, where can I go online to get accurate info on some of the species that will be in my series? I just want to make sure I'm giving the most accurate info. Thank you again, and hope to hear from you soon. Well, hey, thank you very much, Rex. Thank you so much. Yeah, man, here's the problem with online searching dinosaur facts. A lot of companies who sell things like dinosaur toys and that kind of stuff, they don't really necessarily have people that know what they're doing or that know a lot about dinosaurs. And so they just simply go cut and paste things that they find online without doing any sort of research. And it begins to perpetuate incorrect information. And it's very frustrating. Sometimes I'll give you a perfect example. I saw a website once where somebody spelled Giganotosaurus. They spelled it Gigantosaurus. And so Gigantosaurus was there, and they had specific wording about, I think they said something like Gigantosaurus was the biggest meat-eating dinosaur that ever lived in North America. It was completely inaccurate. I've seen that probably 4 other places where somebody just copied and pasted that from somebody else. And it's very, very frustrating because the name is wrong and the location is wrong. So I understand your concern about, man, where do you go to get this stuff? I will tell you this. I would look to Dr. Thomas Holtz has a book called Dinosaurs. And I am of the opinion that he put a tremendous amount of work of ensuring sizes and information about his animals, about all the animals in the book, and they're all in there. And of course, it's only as up to date as when it was printed, but there may be new things in it. But I would say that I would feel more comfortable getting his book and using it as your reference, because at least with Dr. Holtz, you have a professional, you have a true paleontologist, you have a teacher, and you have somebody who absolutely is interested in the science. He makes sure that when he says something, it's as accurate as it can be scientifically. He doesn't shoot from the hip. He doesn't embellish size and weight to draw attention, if you understand what I mean. Like, for instance, I would be of the opinion that if Dr. Holtz was ever digging up a dinosaur and he found it and it looked like it was bigger than Tyrannosaurus Rex, I don't think maybe 3 people in the world would even know he found it until they completely excavated it and they completely measured it 25,000 different ways. And only then would he announce it, because he knows that to say something like that, I found the biggest Tyrannosaurus Rex, gets a tremendous amount of publicity. But as you guys all know, so many times it turns out to be no, that wasn't the case. You made an estimate based on emotion and not necessarily the fact. And so that kind of stuff hurts the science. So I would say get his book. It's called Dinosaur. All you guys have to do is look up Dr. Thomas Holtz Jr., and it's called Dinosaurs. It's got some great artwork by Louis Ray. He does some tremendous artwork, but that's where I would recommend you go. All right, you guys, listen, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I've enjoyed doing it. Please follow me on Facebook. Go to my Dinosaur George Facebook and follow me there. Also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram, and you can find those links on my podcast page. You can either go to my website, dinosaurgeorge.com, and go look for the podcast dropdown, or it's dinosaurgeorgepodcast.com. You can go straight to the page. As always, I appreciate your feedback. If those of you are listening on the YouTube channel, please leave your feedback and your comments. And again, for everybody, if you ever see me online on Skype, dinosaur.george, if you see I'm online and you'd like to chat, if you have a question, or if you just want to talk about dinosaurs and you would like to be a part of this podcast, I would encourage you to do it, because I like to have as many guests as I can, because I think it's more fun to hear from other voices. Final thing, I have one interview set up in August. It is with a doctor down in Chile who found a human footprint. It's a paleontologist who found a human footprint, one of the earliest of humans living in South America. She's going to come on and give us all the information about it, so I'm very excited about that. So I'll keep you posted on that. All right, thank you guys. Listen, take care of yourselves. Take care of the people around you. The world would be a better place if we were all kind and decent to each other instead of constantly arguing and fighting. That ain't the way to go. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Dinosaur George Show. Please follow us on our social media links and join our mailing list. If you're interested in having Dinosaur George speak at your event, please visit our website at dinosaurgeorge.com. Until next time, keep digging for clues about the past.